We have a lunch and learn on February 20th where Dr. David McCollum from Rice is coming to discuss his Pulitzer Prize winning book about an enslaved woman and how she gained her freedom. And so it will be on our website. It's at 12 noon. And once a month, we have these lunch and learns, and we try to bring in educators from outside and other people to discuss things that are of importance to the community as a whole.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Spotlight Houston, where we bring you the best people, places, and events in Greater Houston. In this episode, we're diving into Houston's Black history with the Heritage Society. We're joined by Martha Whiting-Goddard, Kijana Wiseman, and Dr. Don Williams. Three incredible guests who are preserving and sharing the powerful stories of Houston's African-American pioneers. Martha is a descendant of Reverend Jack Yates, one of the founders of Juneteenth, and has played a key role in preserving his historic home, which is now an UNESCO Site of Memory. Kijana is a teacher, performer, and oral historian known as the Griot, who brings history to life through storytelling and reenactments at the Heritage Society. She is also a direct descendant of General Sam Houston and has worked to preserve her family's legacy, including a historic school for Black children built by her great-grandfather in Walker County. Dr. Williams, a retired U.S. Army First Sergeant and Texas historian, will take us through the history of Houston's 6 historic wards and their impact in the Black community. We'll also explore the Heritage Society's special Black History Month program, From Plantation to Emancipation, which takes visitors on an emotional journey through 3 historic homes with live reenactments. This is Spotlight Houston, episode 123, with an original air date of Monday, February 3rd, 2025. Please note that we edited this interview for time. Spotlight Houston is brought to you by Story Zone Media. And now here's your host, Blanca Quezada.
So hi, everyone, and welcome to Spotlight Houston. For me, history is really important because we have the opportunity to look back in time and, actually see or hear about all the brave and creative people that shaped us personally, our country or city, as well as our communities. So February, to me, is very interesting because it's Black History Month, and there's so much history. This is when we need to take the time to recognize, to remember, and honor the contributions of this community. One of the organizations that I really, really like has been helping Houston to conserve the city's history, and that is the Heritage Society, which is right almost at the edge of downtown. And they have saved 10 historical homes that are beautiful by relocating them to Sam Houston Park. And whenever we have events out there, you can actually see them. And they're just gorgeous. So they've saved these 10 historical homes, and as well as having a museum gallery, exhibits, and events that will help us understand the rich tapestry of Houston's heritage. So I'm honored today to introduce you to 3 incredible people that I'm so happy that I met, or that I'm meeting actually, are leaving their huge mark in our city for future generations, and who will give us more insight into why we celebrate Black History Month. So first of all, it is my privilege to introduce you to Martha Whiting-Goddard, who is a descendant of one of the founders of Juneteenth, Reverend Jack Yates. He lived in this beautiful historic home that was relocated from the 4th Ward to Sam Houston Park by their family. She is also a consultant and programs developer for the Heritage Society and the Society's Juneteenth program. The Jack Yates House has been preserved and managed by the Heritage Society in the city of Houston since 1994, and it tells the history of the years of establishment, education, and progress following Juneteenth in Houston. It has been noted as the most famous house in Texas by Reader's Digest for 3 years. The Yates House is one of the Heritage Society's 3 houses that is designated by UNESCO And if you don't know what UNESCO means, that is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization as a site of memory for the enslaved people's route project. And that I can't wait to hear more about it from Martha. But then we also have here a retired, incredible man as well. He is a U.S. Army First Sergeant, and he has done so much. And he is a lifetime member of the Heritage Society and also an amazing Texas historian. He travels throughout Texas studying and photographing historical sites, including homes, historical markers, and cemeteries of Texas families. He also is connected to other historical organizations such as Sam Houston Memorial Museum. And he stays pretty busy. And he is getting to write a book pretty soon. And I think it's going to be great. I can't wait to see it. And last but not least is Kijana Wiseman. She's a teacher, an entertainer, a very charismatic person. She is known as I hope I'm going to pronounce this right, the Griot?
Griot.
Griot. The Griot. What does that mean?
Singing storyteller. Griots were the world's first historians, the first educators, and the first entertainment. And they usually worked a 25-mile circuit in Africa, going from village to village, and they kept the lineage of the people. And if you go to Exodus, you can see a song of a griot with this man beget this man beget this man. Well, that was a tradition because they didn't have books, and so the griot was your walking book.
Yeah. That makes sense. It makes sense. And you're also an incredible singer. Just incredible. You have an amazing voice. And you're recognized for your performances. And she also helps the Heritage Society by performing as an actor during their tours.
Yes,
and
the elevated tours.
Yeah. So welcome to the show. It's great to have you all here to help us understand a little bit more about what Black History Month means to you and the Black community. So, Martha, how about we start with you? How does it feel to being a Jack Yates descendant? Do you feel a certain responsibility to try to walk in his steps? And what is it about him that inspires you?
Well, yes, I feel a responsibility because that's why my mother and her 5 daughters, of which I am one, we donated the house to the Heritage Society to make sure that the stories from this family would be retold to expand people's knowledge of history, especially among the diverse population of Houston and all the people who come here to visit, so they could see what formerly enslaved people were able to do here shortly after the end of the Civil War. And because Jack had 11 children, they had a lot of different things going on. In other words, most of his children were teachers, but he also had entrepreneurs and printers and people who were very industrious. And so even though his family came here from Virginia, they always still kept in touch with each other. And so it's kind of like his family and his story has been going on a long time. And so that house is like the embodiment of what he and his relatives who came with the Civil War Army, the Union Army, came here and they were able to build for he and his family to live in.
So he
it's
actually
a continuing story.
Yeah, so actually he was the one that kind of created Freedmanstown.
Well, he was instrumental in it, yes, because he purchased property there in 1869 that is still there. He was able to work with, because of his ability to get along with people and how he knew how to work with other people, because from the time he was a child, his best friend was someone who was white, who was really his enslaver's son. because the mother
Yeah.
took care of both of them. And so both Jack and he. And so one taught the other to read, and they just, continued along with each other. And so when people were being freed, his enslaver, and it freed all of the slaves that were on his plantation. Jack
Yeah.
came here because his wife was still enslaved, and that's how he ended up coming to Texas. Otherwise, they would probably still be in Virginia, because
Yeah.
his brother and his brother-in-law, who came here and helped him build the house as Union soldiers, they went back after so long to Virginia, and they didn't stay here. But one of their descendants live here now.
So, Martha, what does Black History Month mean to you?
Well, it means that the history of our people is being remembered and celebrated and discussed and shared with the entire country, because there's so much that we have given to building and continuing to contribute to the country.
It was a day when I was a child. It was a Black History Day, Negro History
but
Day. Sorry.
that was in school, but
Yeah,
I'm
it
just
was a
saying.
day. I remember that. It was a day, not a week or a whole
Well,
month.
that may have been here in Texas. It was really supposed to be a week. It was
Well,
really a week.
it is
I mean,
Texas. Yeah.
yeah, but that's why I say it was a week, because you would have celebrated church, and then there was one day at school that you might have a celebration. But it went from there until they are sort of in the 70s, people started adding on more time to make it a month. And then in 1986, President Reagan made it officially into a month celebration. And so it's at the point now that there is, through the association, ASALA really kind of started this when it had a different name, but they have a topic that they celebrate each year. So it's not the same thing all the time. It's something different. So you learn something new or something more every year. And that's what it's supposed to do, educate everybody about the contributions of African Americans to America.
Yeah. For example, this year's theme is concentrating on labor.
The unions this year, they're telling people the story of labor unions in this country that Black people have started and contributed to, because we've had unions since the 1930s. My father joined a union. And so it's like, because he joined a union, he has daughters who joined. It's kind of like, if you saw somebody do it, you just continue to do it because you knew it contributed to your life here.
Right.
So that's what this year is about. It remembers, we sing songs and have, programs and things that tell you about our history in other ways. But when they have different topics, it educates everybody, which is what's important. And since you have an educator here, Dr. Don, he can tell you what they do in the schools now, because when we went to school, as Kijana said, we had maybe one day at school that they reminded you of. But since it's a full month, there are activities all over the city and, all over the country.
And in 27 other countries.
Yeah. Well, since you work or volunteer at the Heritage Society, what is the Heritage Society doing to make sure that they can recognize this month and tell those stories?
Well, we have our extended tour, which Kijana is our chief reenactor, from the Plantation to Emancipation. And we highlight the three homes that were recognized as sites of memory of the slave trade, which are the Kellum Noble House, built in 1847, the Fourth Ward Cottage from 1866, I think, and the Yates House from 1870. And so she's telling a story of someone who would have been in those homes during that period.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at how these homes still exist, you know?
Well, the city owns them and the Heritage Society owns what's in them. And because the houses have been moved there from other places, Dr. Don needs to tell us about the wards that were like the houses came from,
Yes,
where
yes,
Black
yes.
people lived, 3rd Ward and 4th Ward. Dr. Don?
Yes.
Yeah,
Well,
good.
well, wonderful. In that part that she had mentioned, I'm an educator, and the class I teach now is African American Studies. Here in the United States, we piloted it at first, and now it's officially a class now that we teach at high school level. And so I'm glad to have that. Well, talking about the wards, I'm actually pretty passionate about the wards because of the 6 wards that we have, I've actually lived in 3 of them. That is the 2nd Ward, the 3rd Ward, and part of the 4th Ward. See that Houston was actually founded in 1836, and somewhere around about 1837, then the founders actually wanted to divide the political, to do a political divide, and it was pretty small. It was Houston was only about 9 or 10 square miles in length and everything else. So they actually divided it. If you go downtown, you can see where it's divided at, and this was in 1840. If you go on Main Street in Congress, right there in the middle of that divides the first 4 wards. The first
Oh,
ward being
wow.
up where
Know that.
UHD is at. The second ward being down south, more likely where the navigation goes to where the original Ninfas and the Esplanade. Then you have
The
the
East.
3rd ward, which is where the U of H and TSU is at. And then you have, of course, the 4th ward. The 4th ward is actually where the Heritage Society is at, the Freedmen's Town, and also the Antioch Church. The Freedmen's Town obviously was one that most of the blacks had the opportunity to, buy property and then those kinds of things. But obviously the 2nd ward was probably it was more of a Hispanic town, but much later. But they started moving into those particular areas. Then you had the 5th ward. The 5th ward was created after Houston had expanded a little bit. And 5th ward definitely started off as white. It was mostly Irish, and it had a lot of cattle. It also had the cotton there. And we made the 6th ward. The 6th ward has they may have some blacks in it, but not a lot of them. As a matter of fact, one of the most famous people from there is Mary Kay. Mary Kay actually lived there.
Wow. And so what does Black History or Heritage Month mean to you?
Well, Black History Month it actually means a whole lot to me. It is the one month, and people talking about how it's the shortest month of the year. No, it was made to coincide with Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass' birthday, and so it just happened to be a short month. But to me, it's a time, it's a bleed off for me because I do celebrate Dr. King. But then we go into the Black History Month. It's a time that we concentrate on something new every year. Okay, continuing on with the lessons that we learned before, but we also talk about that. And I would say it's a time for me to dig up as much history as I can, locally, obviously, but all around. And I try to, again, get at least 5 or 6 different lessons every single year that I study Black History Month.
Yeah. And reflect on the lives that came before us. So,
yes, most definitely.
The difference they made for us. So,
Right.
Ms. Kijana.
Yes, ma'am.
For you, what does African or Black History Month mean to you?
It's a time to return to our roots. I'm the great granddaughter of General Sam Houston, and I have the property in Huntsville where his grandson built the first school for African Americans because my grandfather married a woman who looked like she came from Nigeria. And my great grandfather knew that his little chocolate grandchildren would not be allowed to get an education because they weren't educated. They weren't building schools for Black people in Texas back in 1921. We're talking 1920s. Okay.
Yeah.
So and you've heard of the Rosenwald schools.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's the property that I have. It was the first public school for Black children in Walker County. And so I do an Earth Day festival there every year in April, of course. And it's called Return to Our Roots because I really my journey really began during COVID because, I performed in 23 countries and I usually, I'm gone, but COVID wouldn't let me go anywhere.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so I went to Huntsville and I said, I've been paying on this land that my mother's school land. I don't even know where it is. And I went and I found it, and we found the well, and we found the footprints of the school, and there were still a lot of people who were alive back in who went to that school. They're mostly in their 90s now, and they come out every year, and their children come out, because the thing is that if we don't share, if we don't unearth our own heritage, nobody's going to do it for us.
Nah. So
And so it's vital that we continue to remind people and to learn, because this past, I think about 2 days ago, I saw a TikTok on, well, maybe it was Facebook, I don't know. Anyway, it was on the wife of Frederick Douglass, and how much she contributed to his success. And behind every great man, there's a greater woman. Sorry, that's not the way it goes.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is that there's so many stories that are lost and buried, and it gives us an opportunity to really reenact and remind people, and for some people, inform them of their heritage.
Yes.
So
Congratulations for having and preserving that land.
Oh yeah, I was bored, and I needed to go someplace, and so my husband bought me a little RV, and I put it on the land, and since I don't have a well, I use air water from a dehumidifier, but it's there, and and people know about it now, and they're remembering Rosenwald. And because Mr. Rosenwald contributed $63 million of his money to build 5,537 schools in 15 Jim Crow states for Black people. And he's just beginning to be recognized for it. And so my property is on the National Register as a Rosenwald property. But by being asked by Martha and Anna and Allison to come down and portray, which is my profession. I am a griot. That's what I do when I perform in other countries. But to be able to do that in Houston on a regular basis is phenomenal. It's wonderful. It's invigorating, and people are beginning to find out about it.
Yeah.
So
you've been recording the stories of the students that used to go there?
Yes. In fact, my mom was one. You see, she went there. They told me that she used to sneak into the schoolhouse when she was like 4 years old. They couldn't find her. They would always find her under somebody's desk at that school. And then when she was finally able to go there, she loved it. Then her grandfather, John Wesley Wilson, was a professor at Sam Houston State Teachers College, his grandfather's college. But Sam's doctor's granddaughter married Sam's grandson, and that created the Kittrell Wilson dynasty, as it were, in Huntsville. And so I've unearthed so many stories, and people can go to rosenwaldacres.com and read them. But the beautiful thing about the Heritage Society is that this is not way up in the woods. It's downtown in Houston, and it's talking about the history of Houston.
Right.
And that's what's most important. When people are walking up, whether they're from Pawhuska, Oklahoma, or Louisiana, or Paris, the tourists who come in to see the program, I usually welcome them first with freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. It's a long ways from home. Such a long ways from home.
That was fantastic.
My husband did a little video of it with me on the porch, and I didn't know he was doing it at the time. I was just warming up my voice. But he went from that cottage, and he panned up past the trees in the Heritage to the building that is behind it. I think that's the Heritage building, isn't it, or something like that?
Yeah,
that tall building, and then he comes back down, and it's a long way from home. It really is. And so, the thing is that my talents are uniquely suited for this kind of interaction, and I'm an edutainer more than an entertainer. We have to continue to tell our stories, and that's what this is all about. All of this comes together as one lesson of sacrifice and sanctuary.
What I also find interesting is that when we are talking about Black History Month or any other culturally diverse groups that have their months being recognized, we usually hear about the men and their contribution, but women also made great contributions. And they
Well,
were
that's
just
why the
strong.
story
They were
that
just
Two
that's
women.
why the story that we tell are about two women who were enslaved and what it was like to be enslaved, and then what happened when at the end of slavery when you became free, how your opportunities had grossly, enlarged
yeah, they
And
because
see,
do.
the way that Martha wrote it, the two dichotomous relationships. So the first one is an enslaved mother talking about giving the angst that she feels for her 11-year-old daughter, 11 years old, who's been taken away from her to another plantation.
Oh,
And I
heartbreaking.
feel it so fiercely that very often I'm brought to tears in the middle of
Yes,
my presentation.
yes.
And I know that there are many people there have been some people who wiping their eyes too. Then while they go to the second house, I change clothes and take off the slave outfit and put on a petticoat and get a fan and the whole different. In fact, one lady told me, she said it took me a minute to realize you were the same person, because the second that as I play Mrs. Jack Yates, oh, I am proud. I am so proud of Freedman's Town. And this house, as you may not know, was the very first two-story residential home in the city of Houston, was built by my Jack. You've heard of him, John Henry. Oh, he's so famous.
That's great. That's great. So when can we see you or see the reenactment at the Heritage
This
Society?
February, there's going to where it's the second Saturday of the month at 10 a.m. from 10 until about 12. That's when how long the tour takes sometimes. And it'll be February the 8th. And what's the third of the fourth
the fourth
Saturday?
Saturday,
Is the
the
22nd, maybe?
the 22nd.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So, and they can get their tickets, of course, at the Heritage Society, because it's the ticket sales that actually help to keep this program going.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah. So
Right.
the Heritage Society, are they having special exhibits or other performances, or what can we see at the Heritage Society during this month?
We have a lunch and learn on February 20th where Dr. David McCollum from Rice is coming to discuss his Pulitzer Prize winning book about an enslaved woman and how
Oh,
she
wow.
gained her freedom. And so it will be on our website. It's at 12 noon. And once a month, we have these lunch and learns, and we try to bring in educators from outside and other people to discuss things that are of importance to the community as a whole,
Uh-huh.
so people can
Mhm.
be further educated. And
Mhm.
that's why we have the extended tours were supported and started by Houston First, so we could bring in more people to the Heritage Society.
So what was the website you mentioned?
heritagesociety.org.
Okay.
heritagesociety.org, and they need to hit the link that goes to the elevated tours.
And they're very affordable tickets, I must say.
Mhm.
And I am so honored to have had y'all on the show because I have learned so much from y'all.
We thank you for having us today,
Yes,
and
yes.
to
Wonderful.
let us expose you to a lot of things, and
Yeah,
to tell more. Let us share more of our histories with
yeah.
your audience.
And of course, I would like to thank you all for joining me and hope you learned a lot as much as I did. If you have any comments or have any story ideas, please let me know.